Yes, we're live. Welcome to another Well-Being's Essential Conversation here with Dr. Alex today, and we're going to talk about dynamics and struggles in romantic relationships. And since I've been telling a few of my groups that we're going to be doing this today, we've had a list of questions, so I'm just going to get with it. So thank you for taking the time to be with us. And for the viewer, if you're listening, whether it's live or on a repeat, make yourself a cup of tea, take a seat, and allow yourself to take some notes here, because we're going to get into the nitty gritty of dynamics that happen in almost all relationships. And just before I get started, I want to I was going to read a poem, but I lost it off my phone, but maybe I'll come back to it. We're hardwired for a relationship, and we're connected. We're interdependent. When we can't do this thing called life by ourselves. And then when we come together, dynamics happen, struggles happen. So one of the questions that I had from a woman, and she says, how do you know the difference if you're growing apart from your partner, or you have to put some work in?
Well, aren't those the same thing?
I said to her, I says, well, maybe you're answering your own question,
Yeah.
But she was saying, I think what she was trying to say is, when do you know that you have grown apart and that it's done? How do you know when a relationship has run its course?
Well, I think when you don't put the work in to find out the answer to that question, for starters. And I think, I wish we were told from early on that you will grow apart, that you will be different people. I had a teacher and a mentor who used to say that everybody thinks they married the wrong person. Everybody thinks that. I thought it 2 weeks into my marriage. I remember distinctly standing in my kitchen. My husband and I had come back from Greece, and we had this really fun honeymoon and time together. And I think I might have been in tears saying, I think I made a big mistake. And he said, oh, I've been thinking that too. Right? It's 20 years later now. But we both had that thought, and we both had the courage, and we trusted each other to say that we were both scared and we thought we made a big mistake. Because it's really fun, like planning a wedding and getting married and going on a honeymoon, and afterwards you're sort of like, uh-oh.
Yeah, you get into that ordinary love stuff, and you have to do the work. And I remember working with this old timer, and he used to say, this old therapist, and he used to say, well, he was married for 50 years, and he says, I married someone 50 years ago, and she died so many times throughout the relationship.
Oh, I love that.
And he says, you have to allow for your partners to change and grow, and you have to change and grow. And there has to be so many deaths, there has to be so many shedding to be able to last the distance in a way. And I thought that was so profound at the time.
It is, yeah.
And could you tell me your take on that? What does that?
Well, I mean, I think that really holds up, because what he's pointing to is how we change over time, that if we're not changing, we're stagnating. And so when you think about every decade of your life, 20, 30s, 40, 50, 60, 70s, we're different people every decade. Our bodies change, our interests change, our tastes change. And sometimes it's oddly, we come full circle back to the traditions and values that we had in the family we grew up in that we left and ran away from. They're so deeply embedded in us that those are the things we end up actually valuing. But we do shift and change over time. And if we're not in constant conversation about those changes, then we will get to that place of stagnation and then leaving, as opposed to dealing with the tough conversations. It's very scary to sit down with your partner and say, I worry that I don't love you in the same way anymore. Or I really want to go on a scuba diving safari and you're afraid of water. How are we going to manage that? Right? And can you love your partner enough to let them go explore the underworld, water world all over the world, while you learn a foreign language, because you're more grounded and you're interested more intellectually in things? And to trust that There's nothing wrong with that, that we're actually really just different, and we're giving ourselves the space to be different and interesting and grow and see if we come together again or not. And I'm not talking about separation. I'm talking about doing this within the confines of a relationship. Because if you think you're going to divorce or leave anyway, why not find out by way of a richer experience with each other? You know,
Yeah, you're speaking to something very, very powerful there, Doctor, that was brought up in one of our groups, and it was this thing about old-fashioned ideals around that lean towards a sort of promotion of codependence or promotion of merger. And for the
mhm,
viewers, what I'm talking about here is the opposite of what the doctor was just talking about there, where there's a to be in love. And this sort of analogy comes to my mind. Like, to be in love means we stay together and we don't let go, versus being together and in love and giving the other as much space to discover who they are in the world, with rules, boundaries within the relationship. And you were talking about, yeah, going on a holiday to do scuba diving, and someone else, the other partner, going and learning a language. How do you work? And this is what the question was.
mhm.
How do you start to relinquish that grip, or start to challenge those outdated sort of indoctrinations or societal expectations or family sort of rigidities that tell a woman that if the man wants to go and scuba dive by himself, then that's a sign that there's a warning.
Right. Yeah. 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 That's such an old fashioned notion. Well, I think it comes back to the relationship. How much do we trust each other? And there's a paradox in what you're saying, Nigel. I think we are fused and merged and love each other deeply and feel like we would be incredibly distraught if the other person left or something happened to them. But at the same time, we have to let him go, right? It's like the Sting song. If you love someone, you set them free. That was that whole song, right? Free, free, set them free. And so if love is a freeing power instead of a holding power, then you've got the paradox in that of I love you, I trust you, and go do you, right? Go be the best you can be, and then bring that back to me, and I'll do the same. And in that lies novelty and excitation and interest in each other. And that makes your sex life better also. And
Wow.
you have to have agreements like you're talking about. If we have an agreement of monogamy, how are we defining that? Is it emotional? Is it physical? Is it both? How long apart are we actually going to be? If we both take separate vacations for a week, there's not much threat there. If both parties are going to be gone for a month, that's a different configuration. If somebody's going to go, live in Australia for a month to scuba dive, or 6 months, and the other person is in the UK, how often are you going to visit and see each other and, Zoom? How are you going to keep the relationship alive while you have this separation? And these aren't the things that anybody ever talked to us about. And we're ashamed to even talk about it. Like you and your husband's going to be gone for a month, or you're going to be gone for a month. Are you okay with that?
Exactly.
As
Exactly.
opposed to, yes, I'm thrilled he's gone for a month. And then I can go to Italy and learn Italian.
Yeah. I remember, uh, as an 18-year-old, I read the book The Alchemist, and
Oh, yeah.
in the book, the woman waits for the man to come back.
Mhm.
That just was just such a. It moved me to tears, because it moved me to tears because there was such a trust that was just
Ah,
there. It's
yeah,
like that, like you go and do, like, you go off on that journey, and I will, and she knew she was waiting there for him, and he knew that she would be there, and it was
right.
just it was so provocative to my mind at that time to know that that was possible, because all I ever saw was a sort of nuclear family dynamic that didn't seem to really work at times, where there was
Mhm.
always, and this leads me on to the next question, the sort of arguments, I have this came up in the group this week where they're always arguing and sort of what they would so soft fighting, where there's a sort of dynamic where there's a conflict of sorts, and they're repetitive. And as we look into the argument,
Mm,
there's a sort of payoff for each of them in some way. And with the woman who was sharing about this, she would say, "Yeah, well, I would always go away and feel like." I'm never heard. I'm never listened to, and the man goes away feeling that the woman is too needy. That's a
mm.
particular theme of an argument. So the direct question was, when is too many arguments like a warning sign, and when is arguments healthy? Or should you have no arguments? And that's a healthy relationship. And
No, yeah, no arguments is just as bad as constantly arguing. Look, I think as you were talking, what I thought about is really it comes down to, do I trust myself?
Mhm.
Am I trustworthy? Am I deceiving myself? Am I going to lie to my partner? So it's not about trusting the other as much as, do I trust myself? Am I a trustworthy human being? And are we trustworthy people with each other? Can we have the agreement, if while we're separated in this way, and one of us wants to cheat, that we will tell each other first? Like, you'll be the first person to know that I'm interested in someone else, not the last person to know. And that requires very much an adult sense of oneself and a secure sense, and being able to trust yourself and your partner, that you can talk like adults instead of act like children in a relationship, even though it's scary and it feels threatening. That if we're honest, the paradox and irony in that is that we're actually closer and less inclined to do those things. And so when arguing is happening all the time, it's really kind of bickering about nothing or the same circular arguments. I think, again, there's deceit there, and usually self-deceit, because I'm not being honest with what's actually going on with me. And then we have this tit for tat style of communication, which is childish again. Like, I'm more invested in being right than really hearing you and understanding you and getting to the bottom of what's challenging you and what's challenging me, which is typically, I'm scared or I feel lonely. And if I feel lonely, if I say that to you and we're in a relationship and you get threatened by that, what you hear is, I'm not doing it right, then we're in trouble, because you're no longer having empathy for me. You're making it all about you, as opposed to being interested in, well, what's your loneliness about? Well, part of it is that you're working all the time, but part of it is, I've become isolated and I don't have friends, right? Or I need to make new friends, and sometimes I feel like you get threatened by that, right? And then you would have to say, you know what, you're right, because I keep thinking I'm going to work less, but clearly I'm not working less, and I feel bad that you feel lonely, so you should go out with your friends. You hear there's a lot of complexity in this. But as soon as people are blaming and shaming each other for the problems, you're in trouble, because that's a victim stance.
Yeah, and we had a situation play out, and I think sometimes there's games that play out continually in relationships. And
Mhm.
one of the games we discovered 2 weeks ago was this woman. She would always say in the group, "If it only, if it wasn't for my husband, I would be able to do that. I would be able to pursue that acting career that I've wanted since I was 18. Now she's 56 now.
Right.
So she's been married for 30 years, and this is what she's been saying for 30 years.
Yeah.
So what we decided to do is, she asked her, so she set up a thing where the husband said, "You know what? I'm pulling back. I'm working less, and you have all the time to do that acting course." But what
Mhm.
happened was, so he completely relinquished any sort of need and give her all the space, and then she got to meet the fear.
Yeah.
She got to meet the underlying fear
Mhm.
that the game was keeping her away from, like standing up, like shining brightly, like stepping into herself, and that's what the new dynamic was. So as you were sharing it, Doc,
Mm.
there's often something else underneath the table.
Exactly, and we very conveniently blame our partners. Like, unless somebody's got you tied up and has a gun to your head, then you're not going anywhere. But there's always a way to say, yeah, this makes me uncomfortable or I'm afraid. And, there's plenty of roles and interest and need for 56-year-old actresses, right? And sometimes, and she may be like more confident and better now than she ever would have been at 18. But
Mhm.
she's got to go find that out and not blame him for I'm too old or it's too late now and all these excuses people make.
Yeah,
And
the
to
excuse
say,
we're,
yeah,
we're stopping her from stepping out of this child place to this adult place of taking responsibility and taking accountability and really having agency towards that. She was just focusing on the blaming and really masking the fear, which then she started to talk about, and that started to bring her alive as she moved towards it, and it started to spice up the relationship as well.
right. And it makes a space for him to be supportive as opposed to him being the perpetrator or the jailer, the one
Exactly.
that's keeping her from this. He can say, yeah, go do it and have fun. And I'm so excited that you're having fun.
Yeah, wow, it's so well put, because that's what she thought. She thought she was jailed in this life sentence, but to what degree he was doing it, she was self-imposing that on herself as well, and it was
Yeah.
wonderful to see them break through it. Another question that came in from a young man who got married recently, and he talked about he didn't understand it like this, but this is how we got to understand it. And it was like he's just married 7 months, and before he got married, and he had been dating the woman for 6 months. So
Not
and then
long. Mhm.
yeah, and then married then, and so the dynamic was that he was sharing, oh, it's getting a bit boring, and he was, because they went out the Eros, they came back from their holidays, the honeymoon, back into life, and basically what he was confused about, and I think it's not just newly married couples, but even longer running, in
Mhm.
10 years, 15 years. And it's this place where this man was really always, he has these fantasies about when he was chasing and acquisition, acquiring affection, and versus the boredom of developing intimacy.
Right.
So he didn't know that it was the developing intimacy that he was stepping into. He was still ruminating and imagining of all these trophies that he had collected and the excitement of that. And that wasn't there in this new frame of reference called
Mhm.
marriage. And could you speak a little bit to that, to whether it's the fantasies of grass is greener for people who have been married for a while, or freshly married couples where they have this arise in the relationship?
Yeah, I mean, we are salient seeking creatures. We're always looking for that which is new and shiny, exciting, different. And so when we're also very gregarious creatures, and we also crave attachment, as you said. We are wired for attachment and autonomy at the same time. So we constantly have to work with the tension of wanting to be with somebody, feeling loved, validated, needed, and also having our space. We want both of those things at the same time. And I think it requires a great maturity to be able to navigate that. So for this young man, he may not have been ready to get married. He may have had some fantasy, this happily ever after fantasy, that quickly had him realizing that, oh, I'm not going to get my validation from all these different females anymore. It's only going to come from one person. And can I meet her? Can I fall deeply in love with her? Can I really get to know this human being? Because he doesn't know her that well. He knows her as well as he does after whatever it's been, a year and 1 month. But there's so much more to know about her, and they're going to grow and change together over time. And so being interested in what's new about that person is part of the challenge. And it becomes more challenging, as you say, as time goes on and we age and in older relationships. It's very easy to look at a partner of 15 or 20 years and say, oh, I already know what they're going to say, or I already know what they like. And we start to impose that on the person. And we don't know, because we don't ask, that they actually don't like that anymore. Right? Because we're making all these assumptions instead of being curious. And so one of the most novel things human beings can do is to look into each other's eyes, There was an experiment that was done, several years ago. It wasn't really an experiment. It was sort of a social experiment where they had people gaze into each other's eyes for 4 minutes, couples, and the couples found that they fell in love with each other in those 4 minutes. So no talking, but close in eye contact, because the eyes are the window to the autonomic nervous system. We always hear about the eyes being the window to the soul. It's really sort of the same thing, but we are activating dopamine, novelty, seeing each other differently, seeing the person we fell in love with. And we become all these different people to each other over time, right? Householder, parent, co-business owner, dealing with in-laws and aging people, lovers if we're lucky. But oftentimes we stop seeing our partner as the lover. We just see them as a functionary that's around. And so that's why it's crucial for people to take time to go on dates, to have little trips together, whether it's just a day or a weekend, to say, who are you? Like, we're living under the same house. What's going on with you really? Not just what are you doing, but how are you feeling? What are you thinking about? Do you ever feel like running away? Boy, I do. I get spring fever really badly in the spring. I just want to go anywhere. Like, just get me out of here.
I love that. That sort of foundational piece that really, when it's there in a relationship, it can help so many parts of the relationship. If there's communication, if this is honesty, because so many of us, and I had to work through it myself, and still at times I kind of falter, and it's where I get into that adult place where where I can be brutally honest and vulnerable and real,
Right.
versus holding something or pulling back, avoiding, and these things just gather momentum. Whether it's something I'm feeling or something that my beloved has said that's triggered me, and I want to avoid conflict, and I end up just collecting more stamps, and then I'll have a tantrum, I'll give out, or I'll huff and I'll sulk. So
Right.
that sort of dynamic with proper brave, courageous, I suppose it comes to mind to use courageous as a word, to come forth, the risking it all, you can have it all, you can have more.
So can I ask you a question about that?
Absolutely.
So when your partner makes herself vulnerable and real and gets down to the difficult, what effect does that have on you?
Well, a wonderful thing happened today. I had a very busy day today. I went to a cremation ceremony. I had clients. I had yoga. I had my meal date with my meal buddy. And I had a podcast earlier, and I'm on my second one now. And my wife came to me and she said, Nigel, I need more of you. I'm missing you today. I'm really missing you today. And I says, okay, let's take a moment. So I waited until my daughter went to bed, and I says, tell me more about how you're hurting, or tell me more about how you're feeling. And she says, yeah, it's just simply that. She says, I miss you. And then she cried. We were at the ceremony today, the cremation. She's, I'm still hurting from seeing that. And then we cried together, and she just needed someone there to help her be there more as well. And it was just something very sweet about that. And when I'm resourced like that, I can meet her in that place where it doesn't need to be anything more than just, I am fully here to hear you and to be. That's
right. So you're more connected to her.
Yeah.
And you probably find her more attractive than if she were just saying, you know what, you're never home and I'm sick of this, and I never see you, and your work's more important than we are, right? That's not attractive.
Well, what that does is that's the parent, so I get that parent sort of controlling parent coming to me. So my child wants to rebel,
right.
we start playing tennis, with insults.
Yeah, you think I'm not around now? I'm out. I'm out of here.
I'll give you something to be upset about, which is, it was interesting. I would have these thoughts sometimes in my mind, and I used to act out and say them when I was younger. And I think through therapy, I can acknowledge the child. I can acknowledge the critical, defensive, rebellious, controlling aspects of my parent. And I try to stay an adult and then say, wow,
Mm.
well, this is what's really here. She's wanted something from me, and I haven't actually been available today.
Yeah.
So, and it takes time to do that. And I think the thing that's helped me learn to do that most is realizing that sometimes I'm insensitive, sometimes I'm not connecting, sometimes I'm displaying. And I learned that in group therapies over the years. You know,
Mm.
I got that echoed back to me, and that really helped me shape how where I can call myself into question, and then that helps shape then how I am. And again, I'm not saying I'm the best thing since sliced bread, but I'm improving little by little as I walk along this path. But something jumps out at me that someone said today, and it's this thing called, I call it a stroke economy,
Mhm.
but they call it appreciation. You know, and it's similar to what you're talking about. And the guy says, she never appreciates me. She never
Mm.
appreciates me. And I'm curious, he said to the group, he asked the question, he says, what happens when you can't get her to tell you anything, that I can't do anything right? It's always, you know, again, it's arguing to some degree, but, and I use the word stroke economy because it's just, it's so powerful to tell someone or say thank you, or tell them that how much they matter to you, or tell them,
Yeah.
"Hey, you know what, you bought that beautiful rose for the garden, and every day I walk past it, I think of you, or I think of the
Mhm.
effort you went to get that rose, and it looks lovely. And actually, my friends saw that rose and they liked it as well." It's just these small appreciation for the other. And what happens? He was more or less asking, how do I get that back? How do I
Mm.
get back my partner being able to appreciate me because I feel starved at the moment?
Does he appreciate her?
Well, he struggles with appreciating himself,
I
uh,
see.
and he says he is trying to make more effort now.
Uh-huh.
They've been like boats passing at nighttime for a long time.
Well, I think it's useful for people to start to institutionalize these things if they don't have a habit of doing it. And often, if they don't have a habit of doing it, it bumps up against their shame. They feel ashamed of even saying it, like giving someone a compliment, because what if I'm rejected or they blow it off or something? So it would be really useful for this couple for him to say, hey, are you willing to check in with me every night for a week and to try something? And so to start with, each person gets whatever, 7 minutes. So you'd have 15 minutes basically. And you can start by getting one thing off your chest. Like, is there something that I did today or you did today that bugged me? So we're not talking about big things, but like, I ask you not to slam the door when you leave. And this morning you slammed the door and it woke the baby. Or, the dog started barking, something like that. And then after both people talk about their grievance, then what is one thing that you appreciate about the person that they did today? And so that appreciation can be, thank you for going to the grocery store. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Like, I really appreciate that you do that for the family every week. Or thank you for taking out the trash cans. These can be very small pedestrian things. They don't have to be, oh, you bought me a gold watch today. Um, or like you said, I appreciate that you bought that rose for the garden. It really brightens my morning when I see it at
Mhm.
this time of year. So
Yeah.
little things like that, where they're both giving appreciations. And then, each person can ask for some kind of touch if they want. So for a hand massage or a foot massage or a shoulder massage. I mean, this is not a long period of time if it's 7 minutes per person, right? So it's really, that's just a 15-minute check-in. You could extend it to 30 minutes if you have more time, 15 minutes each. That's one way. Another way is to check in with each other about, what was your win for today? Like, what did you accomplish today that you're proud of? Because we think of wins as being, oh, I got a promotion, or I got a raise, or I've got a new job, as opposed to, I worked out today, right? Or I had 2 podcasts. That's a win. And then what is your gratitude? What are you grateful for today? That's a little bit different because gratitude can be about anything, as opposed to an appreciation, which is directly about you and directly about me.
What do you think about imago? What do you think about sort of communication styles, like where you mirror what the person says if it's a conflict or they're upset? Where I hear
Well,
you say this, or and you know, I imagine you would feel this. Like, how do you feel about that style of communication in a relationship?
I think it's useful to an extent because when you were talking earlier about your partner, I thought, oh, the thing that you're doing is when she says, I don't see enough of you, you were having empathy for her and curious about her experience. You didn't get defensive and start defending, well, I worked so hard today and I had all these things going on, which is what most people do. Instead, you moved right into empathy for your partner. And I think that kind of reflecting back what you hear the person saying and empathy is great. The problem with that modality is when people are really angry and they flip their lid, they no longer have their cognitive capacities on board. They're strictly limbic, right? They're in their reptile brain. That goes out the window. They're not able to, or if they do it in a way that's really vicious,
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
condescending or
Yeah,
something.
so it doesn't really go well under heat, under pressure. I think under pressure, we're much better off if we rely on ourselves and ask ourselves, what am I doing right now? How am I escalating this? Why am I so upset about this? And I can start to regulate myself and bring myself off the ledge.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, too. And for the viewers listening, because I don't think there's any viewer out there who's never lost it on some level. Whether it's So I have met a few who don't believe in anger. Anger is a bad thing, but the majority of us, I think, we understand that we do get in touch with anger and frustration and rage. So you talk about escalation or how to regulate. What would be some ways where someone could start to notice that they're escalating internally or getting more and more overwhelmed? What are ways to kind of understand that and to maybe regulate?
Well, if somebody has a real anger problem, they should get help with anger management. There's a great little book called The Anger Management Jumpstart book. Is that what it's called? It's got the word jumpstart in it.
Okay.
If we were to go on Amazon right now, I could find it. But it's a small book. It's really about a mindfulness practice, and people love this book. It's really helped a lot of people. I think it's the Anger Management Jumpstart Kit or something like that. So that's one version of anger. That's uncontrollable rage. And I think of rage, I think about high anxiety, that I'm so anxious, I just can't take it anymore and I blow up. But if you're starting to get angry or you have appropriate anger, like I could be angry at you in this moment in this tone of voice. Say, you know what? I've asked you 10 times not to slam the door when you leave every morning, and you slammed it again this morning. And it really makes me feel like you don't respect me or you don't care about our child because it wakes the child up every morning. So, what are we going to do about this? And I'm tired of asking you and then you don't do anything about it because I feel like I'm nagging you, like I'm your mother. And I need you to either put one of those little door stoppy things on the door so it closes quietly, or just to stop doing it. Okay, so that's a form of anger. But if we're in a heated conversation and it's an old loop that we get into, if somebody can start to see the suffering on the horizon and they say, you know what, I'm going to take a time out right now. I think we need to stop. It's 10 o'clock at night. This is not going to go anywhere good. Or I need to take 5 minutes or 10 minutes and come back to this conversation and go for a walk. Then the other person has to honor that. You've got to be able to tolerate that you're going to take a time out so that you can get your prefrontal cortex back online and take a beat to think about what is going on here. Why am I doing this? What's really going on with me, not just what a jerk the other person is.
One of the things that we hear in the group a lot is when that space is being asked, the other's internal little child doesn't allow it to happen.
Hmm.
I mean, where they want to keep at it because it feels too scary for the other to leave. And chaos is better than being alone in those moments for some people. And
Right.
yeah, any sort of way to navigate that dynamic where
Yeah.
it's so hard to separate in those moments where we know we're only hurting each other.
I think there has to be a conversation when people are calm, when they're not fighting, for the person who can't tolerate the other person taking a time out to say, this is what I need in those moments. And they don't get to say, I don't know, right? Because that's a victim stance also. You know, if you're asking me, if I can't leave in that moment because it's getting heated and I'm worried this is going to get really extremely rageful and our kids are going to hear it, or physically violent, what do you need in that moment? How can I help you and help us de-escalate this? And if you don't know, you need to go find a therapist, or you need to figure it out, because I don't know what's right for you. I know what's right for me, but you don't like what's right for me. And what I think is right for me and right for both of us is to walk away from this situation. I'm not leaving. I'm not getting in my car and driving away and never coming back. These are your abandonment issues. So you need to figure out what you need in that moment. Maybe you need to stop talking and you just need a hug. Or maybe you need to be left alone, but you just want me in the other room.
I know this is very, very out there, but in an older relationship, there used to be a lot of arguing and and uh, we came up with this idea which worked, which was when either of us got really, really angry at the
Mhm.
other, we would dance.
That's great.
We would dance like like a
Mhm.
techno sort of mosh pot. We would
Yeah.
let we'd let the words go, and we could see the physicality. And for me to witness the other, and for the other to be able to witness my movements, it
Mhm.
was somehow more digestible. It was able to withstand and let it inform me in a deeper way than the words on possibly the finger wagging. It was,
Yeah.
I don't know. It was a wonderful transaction that happened that
What
helped.
a brilliant intervention, because what's happening is the body is moving the energy, because that's where we get stuck. We get into this fight or flight mode, and two people are fighting. They can't flee, they can't leave because it's too threatening. So let's just move the energy in the body in this way. Let's shake it off, which is what animals do,
Yeah, yeah,
after they've been assaulted. So you were able to shake off the anger.
yeah. Well, it was like just like in my mind at that time showing the anger, but there was so much movement that the anger dissipated,
Yeah.
and then whenever we allowed, and it wasn't about getting rid of the anger, it was like fully embodying it. And then when you
Mhm.
can fully embody anger, it gets really interesting because it shifts to something else.
Like to sex, I bet.
Well, yeah, a lot of pleasure came, a lot of
Yeah.
pleasure in those moments, and that was even without the touch of another. I was just like in the body. It was the very moments that helped me personally
Mhm.
deal with a long running anger issue that I had, and this was one of the ways, if not one of the major shifts, by being able to fully be in it and be witnessed in it.
Yeah, because look, there's a lot of testosterone there and a lot of adrenaline that needs to get discharged. And so that's why it was a pleasure state also, because you were able to discharge all of that.
And it wasn't guilted or it wasn't shamed, and
Mhm.
it felt like it was finishing an imprint of sorts, that I was able to move through something that
Right.
I was holding. And then as I'm talking to you, remember as a young boy, I used to break a lot of toys,
Mhm.
belonging to my sisters and stuff, and that
That's
was one way
that's
where I
completing
was
the action there also. Yeah, I mean, in
exactly.
all the somatic modalities, they talk about how do you complete the action you couldn't complete then,
Yeah,
right?
somatic experience, and they talk about the finishing that imprint, and I
Yeah.
think that was it on one level. And yeah, and again, I suppose I want to, just before I want to get this last question, and before we have to kind of depart for today,
Mhm.
and it's this little thing called children,
Mm.
parenting styles and conflict that arises in long-running romantic relationships around how to parent the children. And this came in three times this week within our groups around dynamics that play out and being a parent. We don't have so much of that because we're kind of on the same page, which is wonderful. But I mean, a lot of parents who struggle around how they got parented is being so different than how their partner got parented.
Yeah.
And then it's a real
conflict, right? And then the child is stuck in the middle of that conflict. So this goes back to where we started this conversation when you said communication is everything. You know, people don't sit, they say, oh, we're pregnant, we're having a baby, but they don't sit down and say, so how are we going to parent this child? What are your ideas? What are my ideas? Maybe we should take a parenting class, like find a parenting class that we both agree with and go get on the same page so we don't make a crazy child. Because
I'm laughing because the couple who came in went to a parenting class by a priest.
And that was their choice. They chose a priest.
Well, it was a priest, you know, it was in the Catholic Church, you know, in small villages in Ireland. You go to the priest and he gives you the parenting class of how to be a parent.
Spare the rod and spoil the child.
But yeah, so there's other options out there, Doc.
Right. There are lots of online parenting classes, I'm sure, and there are a million books on parenting also. One of the best ones is Dan Siegel's book, Parenting from the Inside Out, right? Because he's making a case for what we're talking about, that this is an inside job, that you have to look at yourself and your issues because you will transfer those to your child. And do you want your child to be raised the way you were? I might say yes to that, but not completely. So you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you also don't want the dirty bathwater. You know, there were things that all of our parents did that were incredibly useful and sound, and other things that were ill-informed. And we live in a different time now also.
Yeah, absolutely. And I had this, you know, we hand on so many styles of parenting, and we hand on so many sort of outdated stuff. You know, like I had a woman share a little bit about how her mother, you know, it was, you know, it was kind of her mother and her grandmother. There was the same thing where the children do not talk at the table. They do not talk at the table. And when it came out that, and there was no talking in the house, and the grandmother, we got to understand that the reason why that was back then was because it was through a time around the Blitz where there was a lot of bombs and there was a war, and there was like, we got to be silent because we've got to hear the pain.
Right.
So and that sort of mentality, and it's not just a hand me down, there's intergenerational trauma attached to that.
Yeah.
But that's where a big part of the origin of that dynamic, and it was so, I missed a generation or two, but we caught it in the second generation, and it was very, very interesting. So there is lots of hand-me-downs that just don't work anymore. They're outdated.
Right. Yeah, that's a fascinating story. There's so many stories like that, you know, that still from World War II that linger generationally, that we don't even know where our parents got it from, and they don't know. So that's why it's very useful to interview our parents, find out what their childhoods would like, you know, find out, if you can, interview your grandparents. What did they live under? How did these things come to pass in the family? What seems violent or inappropriate was often a survival mechanism, like you said. You know, we don't talk at the table. Sounds horrible, but if you're listening for bombs and safety, they were actually keeping, you know, their children safe.
I had another couple come in, and the couple's dynamic was they were Vietnamese, and the couple shared, you know, that he's always telling lies. You know, well, one of them was American, and so and we looked at it over time, and it turned out that they were second generation, and when their grandparents were fleeing from Vietnam, you couldn't tell anybody anything. You told them what you had to tell them. You couldn't tell the truth, and you told whatever you could to survive. And that style was brought on and handed down, and then the grandchildren will live in it. And it didn't make sense. So it was all these sort of really interesting sort of things that we have to look at in our relationships, and in relation to parenting, understanding the background of our partner's childhood, so we can have more compassion.
Right.
And if we have more compassion, then we can have more breathing space and less conflict.
And we also get to know ourselves deeply, who we are, where we come from, what our ancestry is, what we like and don't like. And, an unexamined life is a life that's not lived. And I don't know who said that. It's not me, but somebody said that.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
thinking who it was, but yeah, it's true. It's one of the biggest travesties is an unexamined life.
yeah, because we're just sort of like bouncing around off the furniture and we don't know why. And we're miserable usually until we can start to become more integrated and understand who we are. And it's that's where I think, one of the keys to happiness is knowing oneself. And that way we can know our partners and our children, and we can love deeply and intimately.
It starts with ourselves, but we need other
Mm.
people to do it,
Yeah.
and we need other people to be able to develop and grow in the world. And if we can be more intimate with ourselves, we can be more intimate with our partner. If we can be more honest with ourselves, we can be more honest with our partners. If we can call our thoughts into question, we can be more possible. We can share our minds with our partners, as well as our
Mm.
hearts, as well as all our other zones in our bodies as well. And Doc, I'm really enjoyed our time together today,
Yeah, thank you.
and I'm really appreciating the content. And just one final question before we go,
Mm.
for the, and this is, it's just a few word answers, or for people who are in a relationship and they're struggling, what do you do other than communicating? If things are hard, if you're finding, like, for the people where the communication's not working, or the communications, they're in circles and they're sort of like nearing breaking up, what would you recommend?
That they go to couples therapy. They
Exactly.
find a couples therapist that can help them. And, couples therapists often are just good referees. There's something that happens when we are witnessed by another human being. We tend to act more reasonably. We bring our better selves to the conversation. We don't devolve into, these kind of childish and often destructive ways of talking to each other. And you will learn tools for communicating better, making I statements, having compassion and empathy for the other that would allow you to get closer. Because I think when people are arguing like that, they're really trying to find each other. The traction becomes the arguing, however, but they're upset and hurt and angry because they want to be seen, heard, and understood and get close. They're just going about it the wrong way. So don't be afraid or ashamed to get help.
Yeah, because that help can help you come. The shouting is an old, from an old Sufi used to say, the reason we argue and shout is because we're so far apart from our hearts, and we're
Mm,
closer together, then we don't need to shout as much. So
right.
I love that. So thank you for the closeness I've experienced with you today, Doc,
Okay. Thank you.
and for the people listening. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please hit like, share it with a friend, or subscribe, because it really helps us reach out and touch other hearts and other people's minds. So thank you for taking the time to watch, and Doctor, have a lovely start to your weekend.
You too. Thank you, Nigel.
See you later. Bye bye.
Bye.